The cell had 47 rivets on the ceiling. I know because I counted them, twice. Not because I was scared. Counting is just what I do when I need my brain to stay quiet long enough for the rest of me to think. 47 rivets, brushed alloy, hex head. Whoever built this ship did not cut corners on fasteners. I appreciated that about them, even now. The room itself was about the size of a college dorm, which was either a coincidence or the conclave had done their homework on human comfort dimensions. The walls gave off a faint blue light, not from any visible source, just from the walls themselves, like the whole ship was slightly alive and mildly embarrassed about it. The air tasted like copper and something floral I could not name. There was no bed, but the floor was warm. There was no window, but there was a humming in the walls that told me we were moving, or near something that was. I had been aboard for 3 days. Earth was still there. I knew that much because they had not killed me yet, and that felt like a sign. My name is Yara Voss, commander, formerly of a unit whose name I am not going to say here because 2 words of it are still classified and 1 word of it still gives me a headache. I am 39 years old. I grew up in Indiana. I like black coffee, bad weather, and problems that have clean solutions. I do not like ceremonies, speeches, or rooms with no corners to put my back against. This room had no corners. It was oval, of course it was. I had been Earth's sole liaison to the Galactic Conclave for 6 years, which sounds impressive until you learn that, for 5 of those years, the job mostly involved reading reports in a basement office outside Geneva and writing memos that nobody acted on. The Conclave had been watching us for 2 centuries. We had been watching them for 11 years. The relationship, if you could call it that, was mostly one-sided and deeply uncomfortable, like being stared at across a restaurant by someone you cannot quite place. Then they sent the fleet. 40,000 ships. The number does not land right when you first hear it. It does not feel real. 40,000 ships positioned at the edge of our solar system like a wall someone built overnight. Our best astronomers calculated that if every ship in that fleet fired simultaneously, Earth would not just be destroyed, it would be reclassified, from planet to debris field. The math on that was very clean and very final, and it sat in a document on my desk for 6 days before the fleet did something nobody expected. It stopped. 40,000 ships, full approach vector, and then nothing. They just held position. Day 1, Day 2, 3, 4. By Day 6, every government on Earth with a military had a different theory. By Day 9, 2 of those governments had nearly started shooting at each other over the theories. By Day 11, I sent a transmission. 3 minutes long. That was 10 days ago. I was brought aboard 2 days after the transmission went out, which I took as a good sign. When you want to end something, you do not bring the other side aboard for a conversation first. You end it. They brought me aboard, which meant they wanted to understand what I had sent before they decided anything. That was also very clean math. The door opened without a sound. He was tall, 7 feet, maybe a little more. His species was called the Vrethka, the dominant race in the Conclave's upper command structure, and they looked like someone had taken a human skeleton, stretched it by 30%, wrapped it in skin the color of deep ocean water, and then added a second set of shoulder joints and 4 extra eyes. The bioluminescence along his neck and jaw shifted color as he stepped into the room. Pale gold. That meant something. I had read enough of the xenobiology files to know it probably meant something, but I could not remember what. He smelled like ozone and old paper. "Commander Voss," he said. His translator rendered his voice into flat, clean English. No accent, no inflection, like a newsreader from 1987. "General Krethoa," I said. I stayed sitting on the floor. Not because I was being stubborn, though I was, but because standing up to face someone 3 feet taller than you in a closed room has a specific body language that I did not want to lead with. He looked at me for a long moment, all 6 eyes. He had that quality that certain very powerful people have. The ability to look at you as if you are a problem they have already half solved and are now simply checking their work on. Your transmission was received and reviewed by the High Marshal's office, he said. I know, I said. That is why I am still here. He tilted his head, just slightly. You expected to be brought aboard. I expected one of two outcomes. Either you reviewed the transmission and decided it was easier to remove me quietly and proceed, or you reviewed the transmission and needed to ask me something. Since I am sitting in an oval room counting rivets instead of being spread across the upper atmosphere, I am going to say it was the second one. He was quiet for a moment. The transmission, he said, was it a threat or a demonstration? I looked at him. All 6 eyes looked back. 5 of them held the professional calm of a man who had commanded fleets and won wars and signed the surrender documents of 100 species. The 6th, the smallest one, the one set slightly behind and below the others, was different. That one was afraid. Not shaking, not wide, just carrying something heavy that the other 5 had learned not to show. I had seen that look before, that exact specific weight behind the eyes. I had seen it on soldiers the morning after something bad. I had seen it on diplomats when they realized the thing they had spent years preventing had already begun. I had seen it on my own face in mirrors I should not have been standing in front of. I had just never seen it on anything that was not human. General, I said, I would not insult you with a threat. He looked at me for a long time after that. The gold along his jaw shifted, deeper, something closer to amber. I still could not remember what amber meant. I filed it away and waited, which is the thing I am best at. The fleet was still out there, 40,000 ships, and somewhere behind those 6 eyes, a decision was forming that would determine whether my planet survived the next 30 days. 47 rivets. I counted them again. They gave me a chair for the second meeting. It was too tall for me, so my feet did not touch the floor, which I suspected was not an accident. When you want someone to feel small, you adjust the furniture. I let my feet dangle and said nothing about it, because the moment you show someone that their small power games are working is the moment you lose the room. The room was larger this time, a long curved table, 7 of them seated on the opposite side, Cretho at the center. To his left, 2 figures in dark gray uniform coats with insignia I did not recognize, military analysts probably. To his right, 4 others in different shades of pale clothing, none of them Vrethka, different species. One had no visible eyes, one had too many. One breath threw something on its throat that pulsed rhythmically, like a second heartbeat living just under the skin. The 4th one placed a data pad on the table and slid it toward me without speaking. I picked it up. It was Earth, from orbit, real-time satellite imaging, high resolution, so clear I could see cloud formations over the Atlantic. Someone on this ship was running a live feed of my planet. I set the pad back down, face up, so they could see that I had looked and was not moved by it. We have observed your world for 212 years, said the figure to Cretho's far left. Its translator gave it a voice like a cello played badly, low and slightly uneven. What we have compiled in that time is extensive. I am sure it is, I said. We would like to share our findings with you. I assumed that was why I was here. The one with no visible eyes made a sound. It might have been a laugh. It was impossible to tell. The presentation lasted 4 hours. I'm not going to give you all of it because most of it was numbers and charts and timelines, and numbers without context are just noise. But the shape of it mattered. The shape of it was this. They had cataloged everything, every war, every weapon system developed, tested, deployed, and retired, every epidemic, every recovery, every famine, every food surplus that followed, every government that rose and every government that collapsed and what came after. They had a record of human history that was, in places, more complete than our own. They knew about the Mongol invasions. They knew about the Black Death. They knew about the trenches of the First World War and the camps of the Second and the near miss of 1983, when a Soviet early warning system flagged incoming missiles that did not exist, and one man in a concrete room in Russia decided, entirely on his own, not to push the button. When the presenter said that last part, I said, "Petrov." The presenter stopped. "You know this incident." "We named a room after him," I said. "In Geneva, the Stanislav Petrov Conference Room. The plaque outside says, 'Here we remember the man who saved the world by doing nothing.'" We get a lot of diplomats who find that funny until they read the whole plaque. Silence around the table. I waited. The presentation continued. They had data on our weapon development cycles, which averaged a significant new advancement every 12 to 15 years. They had data on our recovery rates from large-scale disasters, which they found statistically improbable, not because we recovered, but because of how fast we did and what we built when we came back. Post-disaster infrastructure, they noted, was often more advanced than what had been destroyed. We had a pattern, apparently, of being hit hard and coming back changed rather than simply repaired. One of the gray coat analysts leaned forward. "Your species has been in continuous armed conflict somewhere on your planet for the majority of your recorded history." It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "Does this not concern your people?" "It concerns us deeply," I said. "That is actually the whole point." The analyst exchanged a look with the one beside it. I continued because I could see they did not understand, and I needed them to, not for my sake but for Earth's. "You are presenting our history of conflict as evidence of instability. I understand why. From the outside, the pattern looks like aggression. But you are reading the data without reading the response to the data. Every time we did something terrible, we wrote it down. We argued about it. We put it in books and taught it to children who had not been born yet. We built institutions specifically designed to prevent repetition. Some of those institutions failed. We built better ones. Some of those failed too. We are still building." The cello-voiced presenter looked at me. "You are describing an ongoing process." "I am describing a species that has never once concluded it was finished improving," I said. "That is not the same thing as a species that enjoys destruction." The one with too many eyes leaned back. It had been very still until now. "Our records include your cultural artifacts," it said. "Art, architecture, monuments." "Yes. We found your memorial sites particularly notable." I waited. It slid another data pad toward me. On the screen was an image I recognized immediately. A long black wall, low to the ground, reflective, set into the earth so that it seemed to sink rather than rise. 58,000 names carved into it. "This structure," it said, "was built to commemorate soldiers lost in a conflict your government initiated under disputed circumstances. A conflict that your own public, at the time it occurred, largely opposed." "Yes," I said. "You built a monument to your own mistake." "We built several," I said. "We have a whole genre of monuments specifically for our mistakes. There are entire museums. We charge admission. School trips go. Families go. People stand in front of photographs of things their grandparents survived or caused, and they stand there until it feels real, because the whole point is that it has to feel real or it stops working." The room was quiet in a specific way. The kind of quiet that means something is being processed, not just heard. I kept going because I was in it now. "You collected 200 years of our worst moments. I understand why those were the ones that caught your attention, because they are large and violent and visible. But the thing you seem to have missed is that every single one of those worst moments is also in a glass case somewhere on Earth with a light on it and a sign that says, 'We did this. Do not do this.' We are not proud of it. We are not ashamed of it either, not in the way that makes you hide things. We display it because the alternative is forgetting, and forgetting is the one thing we have learned we genuinely cannot afford." The cello-voiced one spoke quietly. "Why not?" "Because the cost of forgetting," I said, is doing it again. And we have done the math on what again looks like. We did the math in 1945. We did it again in 1983. We did it again in 2041. I stopped there. Nobody asked about 2041. They looked at me like they wanted to, but nobody asked, and I did not offer it. Some numbers do not need context. They just need to be said in the right voice and left in the room. Krathoa, who had not spoken once during the 4-hour presentation, spoke now, very quietly. You kept all of it. Every bit, I said. The record of your failures. The record of what we are capable of, I said, which is different. He looked at me for a long time. The amber in his jaw had shifted again. Something I had no word for. Something that looked, for just a moment, like the expression a person makes when they understand something they were hoping they would not. He closed his data pad. The meeting ended without a formal conclusion, which meant the real meeting was still happening somewhere else, in rooms I was not in, with decisions I was not part of. That was fine. I had said what needed saying. On the way back to the Oval Room, I passed a corridor with a single small viewport. Through it, I could see the edge of the fleet, just the nearest ships, dark against the stars. Massive, patient. I looked at them for a while. Then I went back to counting rivets. Krathoa came alone this time. No panel, no gray coats, no species with too many eyes or not enough. Just him, filling the doorway, the amber glow along his jaw doing something slow and steady, like a fire burning low rather than out. He carried a single data pad. He sat down across from me, which was the first time any of them had sat, and he set the pad on the floor between us like it was something delicate. I have a translation, he said. I know the original, I said. I would like to verify it. Then read it, I said. He picked up the pad. He did not look at it. He had memorized it, which told me something. You do not memorize a document unless it has been sitting in your head, turning over, not settling. Your transmission contained 5 files, he said. Yes. The first was a historical archive. Every armed conflict your species engaged in from the earliest recorded period to the transmission date, including duration, cause, approximate casualties, and resolution. Yes. The second archive documented recoveries, post-conflict reconstruction periods, institutional reforms, treaties, and the average elapsed time between a catastrophic event and the restoration of functional society. Yes. The third file contained a current military capability assessment, personnel figures, hardware inventory, weapons development status, defensive infrastructure, and strategic positioning as of the transmission date. Correct. He paused, the amber deepened. The fourth file contained a projection. Yes. A projection of human military capability 40 years from the transmission date, modeled under the assumption of no external interference or conflict. Yes. He set the pad down. Commander, that projection. I know what it says. Your species, if left undisturbed for 40 years, based on your own documented rate of technological development, would reach a military capability equivalent to 40% of the Conclave's current total force. Closer to 43 if the fusion drive development completes on schedule, I said. But 40 is a clean number, and I was trying to be conservative. He looked at me for a very long time. The fourth file, he said, was the reason the High Marshal convened an emergency session. I assumed so, I said, but the fourth file was not the most important one. His eyes shifted, all 6 of them, a small coordinated movement that I had started to recognize as the Vreth-Ka equivalent of leaning forward. The 5th file, he said. Read it, I said. He picked up the pad again. He read slowly, and I could tell he was reading carefully, checking each word against the version already living in his head. When he finished, he put the pad down and did not say anything for a moment. so I said it from memory, because I had written it and I knew every word. You have studied us for 200 years and concluded we are dangerous. You are correct. What your models failed to account for is this. We have been trying to destroy ourselves for 10,000 years, and we are still here. We are not dangerous because we are strong. We are dangerous because we are practiced. Every civilization you have ever encountered learned conflict as a strategy. We learned it as a last resort, and we have never stopped improving the resort. You are not approaching a primitive species that does not understand what your fleet represents. You are approaching a species that has survived every version of that fleet it ever built itself, learned from each one, and spent the last 80 years making sure it would never have to build another. That is not a species that will surrender easily. That is not a species that will be pacified by occupation. That is a species that will outlast you, not because we are better, but because outlasting things is the single skill we have spent all of recorded history practicing. The choice before you is not whether humanity is dangerous. We are. The choice is whether you want to spend the next century finding out exactly how dangerous, or whether you would prefer to have a conversation instead. Silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of the panel room. Something different. The kind of silence that comes after something lands exactly where it was aimed. Krathoa looked at the pad, looked at me, looked at the pad again. You are not asking us to leave, he said. No, I said. You are not making a demand. No. You are telling us what we will lose. I thought about that for a moment. I am telling you what we have already survived, I said. What you will lose is the story you have been telling yourselves about what kind of species we are. That story is wrong. I thought it was better to correct it now than to let you find out the hard way. He was quiet again. Then, the High Marshal's emergency session. They debated for 6 days. What was the primary point of disagreement? He did not answer that directly. Instead, he said, there is a faction within the Conclave's War Council that believes the fourth file proves humanity must be dealt with before the 40-year mark, that your current capability is manageable and your future capability is not. That is a reasonable strategic position, I said. He looked at me as if he had not expected me to say that. It is, I continued. If your only goal is preventing a future threat, then acting now is the logical move. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I just think it is based on a misread. What is the misread? I thought about how to say it cleanly. The fourth file shows what we will become if left alone. What it does not show is what we will become if engaged as equals. Those are two very different projections. One of them ends with two civilizations eventually facing each other across a very large and expensive battlefield. The other one does not. He was still. You are offering cooperation, he said. I am offering a conversation, I said. I told you that in the transmission. Cooperation comes after we have both decided it is worth having. He stood. He was quiet for a long time before he spoke again. The fleet will hold position. I know, I said. It has been holding for 10 days. The High Marshal has authorized extended diplomatic review. You will be transferred to a standard guest designation, better accommodations, access to common areas under escort. I nodded. He moved toward the door, then he stopped. Commander Voss, the fifth file, the closing line. He did not turn around. Was that a promise or a warning? I thought about the question. I thought about 2041. I thought about Petrov and his concrete room and the missile alert that was not real and the finger that did not press the button. I thought about all the glass cases with lights on them. General, I said, with us, those have always been the same thing. He left without responding. The door closed without a sound. I lay back on the warm floor and looked at the ceiling. 47 rivets. All present and accounted for. The guest quarters were larger. There was an actual bed which was the right height, so either they had done additional research or someone on this ship had a talent for guessing. The walls were still alive with that faint blue light, but there was a small viewport now, a rectangle of actual space cut into the hull, and through it I could see stars, and at the edge of the frame the dark shape of the nearest conclave vessel. It was the size of a small city. It had running lights. They were green. I spent a long time looking at those green lights and thinking about what they reminded me of. On the third day of the new arrangement, my escort, a young officer whose species I could not identify and whose translator gave him the voice of someone reading a grocery list, led me through a long curved corridor into what appeared to be a common area. Not for me specifically, for everyone. I was being permitted to observe. I sat in a corner with my back against the wall, which the oval room had not allowed, and I watched. The conclave was not what I had expected. I had spent 6 years reading reports that described it as a unified empire, a single governing body with a clear chain of command and a consistent agenda. What I saw in that common area was something different. It was a collection, 847 species, each with its own posture and its own way of moving through space, and its own way of going quiet when something difficult was being processed. Some of them moved in groups and some moved alone. Some of them made sounds I could not categorize. One small species, pale and thin, with 4 arms and eyes like clouded glass, sat in groups of 3 or 4 and seemed to communicate through small coordinated movements of their fingers. No sound at all, just hands talking. I watched them for 2 hours before anyone spoke to me. "You are the human." I looked up. He was small. Not small for his species, I would learn, but small in the room, in the way some people are small in rooms because the room is the wrong size, not them. His species was called the Selhari. I recognized them from the files, pale skin with a faint luminescent blue undertone, large dark eyes set wide, 4-fingered hands. They had joined the conclave 300 years ago, after the conclave absorbed their home system. Absorbed was the word the official records used. There were other words. I had read the other words too. I said. He sat down without being invited, which I appreciated. "I am Submarshal Aelithroman IV," he said. His translator gave him a careful, even voice, unhurried. "I am attached to the Conclave's Strategic Review Office." "What does the Strategic Review Office do?" "We review things," he said, "strategically." I almost smiled. "Is that a joke?" "It was an attempt," he said. "We review historical conflict outcomes and advise the High Marshal's Council on probability modeling for proposed military actions." "So you were in the room when they debated my transmission?" "I was in the room for all 6 days," he said. "It was a long 6 days." He had a data pad in his hand, and he turned it over twice before he showed me what was on the screen. I recognized it immediately. A photograph. Black and white taken from above, a city that was no longer a city, a wide flat expanse of ruin with one partial structure still standing at the edge of the frame. I did not say anything. "I have been reviewing your cultural archive files," he said. "Not the military data, the other files, art, literature, architecture, memorial sites." He looked at the photograph. "I have been looking at this one for 3 days." "That is Hiroshima," I said. "August 1945. Your species did this?" "Yes." "To your own kind?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "And then you built a memorial there." "A peace memorial," I said. "And a museum. There is a dome, the only structure that was not completely destroyed, and they left it standing on purpose. Just the shell of it. No roof. Open to the sky. They call it the atomic bomb dome. Every year on the anniversary, people come and stand near it and are quiet for exactly 1 minute." He looked at the photograph for a while longer. "The people who come, are they the descendants of those who were harmed?" "Some of them," I said. "Some are descendants of those who gave the order. Both come. They stand in the same place." He set the data pad down on the bench between us. "My home system," he said carefully, not looking at me, "was absorbed by the conclave 312 years ago. There is no memorial, there is no dome. There is a colony now on the primary planet administered by Vrethka management. It is productive. He paused. Productive is the word they use in the reports. I did not say anything. I did not need to. He had not said it to get a response. He had said it because I was the only one in the room who might understand why it mattered to say it at all. He picked up the data pad again. The debate in the High Marshal's Council, he said. You asked Krethoa what the primary disagreement was. He did not answer. I will, said Alathroman 4. The primary disagreement was not about your military capability. The projection in your fourth file alarmed everyone, but a large fleet can be countered with a larger fleet. The Conclave has done it before. The disagreement was about something else. He paused. About what humanity would become if it entered galactic space. I looked at him, meaning. The War Council sees a dangerous species and wants to prevent it from growing more dangerous. That is a clean problem with a clean solution. His voice was very even, very deliberate. The other faction sees something more complicated. A species that survived itself. A species that kept every record of every terrible thing it ever did and put those records in buildings and made the next generation walk through them. He turned the photograph over in his hands. A species that might enter galactic space and start asking questions about what happened to the systems that are now colonies. A species with the cultural habit of finding the glass case and putting the light on. The room felt very still. That faction, I said, is afraid of what we would remember. They are afraid, he said, of what you would refuse to forget. I sat with that for a moment. It was clean and it was true, and it landed with the particular weight of things that you understand immediately, but need a moment to hold before you respond to them. Which faction are you in? I asked. He looked at me. His large dark eyes held something steady and old. I am in the faction that has been waiting 300 years for someone to ask the right question, he said. He stood to leave. I stopped him with one question. Is there a memorial, anywhere, for what happened to your system? He was quiet for a long time. No, he said, there is not. After he left, I sat in the corner with my back against the wall and thought about glass cases and lights, and the specific kind of courage it takes to build a museum around your own worst moment. That night, I sent a second transmission to Earth. One line, encrypted, flagged priority. They are not afraid of our guns. Bring the historians. Then I went back to my room and sat on the bed that was the right height and looked out the viewport at the green lights of the nearest conclave ship and thought about what Alathroman 4 had said. Not afraid of what we could do. Afraid of what we would remember. I had not put that in the transmission. I had not thought of it in those terms when I wrote the fifth file. But it was true, and the truth of it shifted something in the way I understood the last 10 days. The fleet had not stopped because of the projection in the fourth file. The fleet had stopped because somewhere in the High Marshal's Council, someone had read the fifth file and understood that they were not dealing with a species that needed to be feared for its weapons. They were dealing with a species that had spent 10,000 years building something much harder to defeat than weapons. Memory, guilt weaponized into architecture, shame turned into curriculum, the stubborn, unreasonable refusal to let the terrible things disappear into history and stop meaning something. That was the deterrent. Not the fleet we could build in 40 years, the museums we had already built, the walls with the names, the domes left open to the sky. The conclave had absorbed 846 species. Every single one of them had been conquered and cataloged and integrated, and their histories had been managed into something useful and non-threatening. The conclave was very good at managing history. We were the first species they had encountered that managed its own. On the fourth day, Krethoa summoned me back. He told me the High Marshal's decision had been reached. He delivered it in the same flat newsreader tone he had used in the Oval Room 11 days ago, but the amber in his jaw was gone. What replaced it, I still did not have a word for. The invasion was suspended, indefinitely, pending species classification review. Full diplomatic process. Earth would be contacted through formal channels within 90 standard days. I would be returned with full diplomatic honors. I thanked him. He nodded. He started to leave and stopped in the doorway exactly the way he had stopped in the doorway of my cell after reading the 5th file, with something unfinished. "Commander Voss," he said, "your historians when you bring them." "Yes." "Tell them to bring the files on the absorbed systems, all 312 years of them." He left before I could respond. I sat down on the bed. For the first time in 2 weeks, I did not count anything. There was nothing to count. There was only the green light outside the viewport and the stars behind it and somewhere past them, 40,000 ships that were going to have to figure out a new story about what they were pointed at. I hoped they had enough glass cases. They returned me on a Tuesday. I did not know it was Tuesday until we broke atmosphere and my personal communicator, which had been off for 2 weeks, reconnected to the Earth network and auto-populated with 14 days of missed messages, 17 emergency briefings, 9 media requests, and 1 message from my sister Claire asking if I was dead, and if so whether she could have my coffee maker. I sent Claire a short reply. She sent back 2 words, "That was about right for us." The shuttle was conclave built, but they had given me the front seat, which had a full forward viewport, and I watched Earth come up beneath us the way it always does when you come back from space, which is nothing like how it looks in photographs. In photographs, Earth looks serene. In reality, from a descending shuttle, it fills the entire view and keeps filling it, getting more detailed and more real by the second, until you can see the brown smear of the continent, and then the green, and then the particular blue-gray of cloud cover over the North Atlantic, and something in your chest does a thing it does not have a name for. I had been gone 14 days. It felt like considerably longer. We landed at a joint facility outside Geneva, which was technically neutral ground and therefore the correct choice, and also meant it took me 45 minutes to get through the welcoming committee before anyone let me sit down. There were flags. There were cameras. There were 12 people in suits who all shook my hand in a row, which is the diplomatic equivalent of being slowly patted on the head. I smiled at all of them. I answered the questions they asked me in the holding room before the full briefing. I drank the coffee someone brought, and it was exactly as bad as UN facility coffee always is, which was the most comforting thing I had experienced in 2 weeks. Then they put me in a room with the people who actually needed to hear what I had to say, and I told them. The full briefing took 3 hours. I had notes, but I did not use them much. The facts were clean. The conclave fleet was holding at the edge of the solar system, no longer in approach formation, now in what their command structure called review posture, which was a way of saying we are still here but we have stopped moving toward you for reasons we are still processing. The invasion was suspended. The diplomatic process had been formally initiated. Earth was not conquered. Not yet, not today. Around the table, 8 heads of state or their direct representatives, 4 military chiefs, 3 diplomatic liaison officers, and Dr. Nathan Cole, who was 71 years old and ran the UN's Office of Historical Accountability and had written the book on post-conflict institutional memory. Literally, the book, the one that was now required reading in 14 countries. I had specifically requested Nathan. He sat at the far end of the table and said nothing during the 3-hour briefing except once, when I described the conversation with Aleph Roman 4 and the Hiroshima photograph, and Nathan made a very small sound and wrote something on his notepad. When the briefing ended, everyone had questions. The military chiefs wanted to know about the fleet's positioning, weapons systems, and withdrawal timeline. I answered what I could and was honest about what I could not. The heads of state wanted to know about the diplomatic framework and what Earth would be expected to concede. I told them, I did not believe the conclave was approaching this as a concession conversation, at least not yet, and that the more important immediate task was sending the right people for the follow-up contact in 90 days. Then one of the diplomatic officers asked the question they had all been circling for 3 hours. She was direct about it, which I respected. Her name was Claire Haddon, and she was Britain's senior extraterrestrial affairs representative, and she had been doing this job since before we knew there was a fleet, and she had the specific tired intelligence of someone who had been right about things for years before anyone listened. "Commander Voss," she said, "the fifth file, the closing offer of a conversation rather than a conflict. Do you believe the conclave will honor the suspension long-term, or is this a delay?" I thought about it for a real moment before I answered. "I believe the fleet stopped because of the fourth file," I said. "The projection, the capability numbers, those created genuine strategic hesitation, and strategic hesitation is what bought us the initial 11 days. I paused. "I believe the fleet is staying stopped because of the fifth file, because someone in that command structure read it and understood that the problem was not our guns, and that is a different kind of hesitation." "Different how?" asked Claire Haddon. "Strategic hesitation," I said, "goes away when you run the numbers long enough and find a solution that looks cleaner than the problem. It is temporary. It resolves." I looked around the table. "But when you hesitate because you do not know how to categorize something, when the thing in front of you does not fit any pattern you have used before, that kind of hesitation does not resolve with more numbers. It requires a different approach entirely." Nathan Cole spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet and precise. "You are saying the conclave does not know what to do with a species that curates its own failures." "I am saying the conclave has absorbed 846 species," I said, "and every single one of them had a history that the conclave then managed, archived, and moved on from. We are the first species they have encountered that managed its own history before they arrived. That is genuinely new to them, and genuinely new things take time." Nathan wrote something else on his notepad. The meeting ended, and I walked out into a Geneva afternoon that was gray and slightly cold and smelled like rain that had not quite decided to arrive yet. I found a bench outside the main building, which was technically not a bench for sitting on but a decorative concrete feature that was the right height, and I sat on it and looked at the lake in the distance. Claire Haddon came out a few minutes later and stood nearby without sitting. "The historians," she said, "your transmission. What exactly do you need them to do?" "I need them to come with us to the first formal diplomatic contact," I said. "Not to argue, not to present, just to be there." I thought about Alethroman IV and his pale hands and his 312 years. The conclave's absorbed species have histories that got quietly filed away. Krethoa told me to bring our historians and tell them to bring the files on those systems. I think there are people in that conclave who have been waiting a very long time for someone to say their history still counts. Claire Haddon was quiet for a moment. "You are suggesting that our diplomatic value is partly archival." "I am suggesting that a species with our particular relationship to accountability might have something to offer a galactic structure that has been running on managed forgetting for several centuries," I said. "Yes." She looked at the lake. "That is either the most useful thing I have heard in 30 years of this work," she said, "or it is deeply naive." "Claire," I said, "I have been in this job for 6 years. I spent most of them reading files in a basement. I am constitutionally incapable of naive." She almost smiled. She went back inside. I stayed on the bench. The rain decided to arrive lightly, the kind that does not require an umbrella but makes everything smell like wet concrete and grass. I sat in it and thought about Krethoa's 5 afraid eyes. I thought about the 6th one, the small one, carrying something heavy. I thought about Alethroman IV holding a photograph of a ruined city and asking if the people who stood near it were the descendants of those who had given the order. Both come, they stand in the same place. That was the thing the conclave had not been able to model, Not the weapons, not the recovery rates, not the 43% capability projection. The thing they could not model was that 200 years of surveillance, and they had never managed to capture it in a data file. The specific human capacity for standing in the same place as your grief and your guilt, and deciding that the standing is worth something. That the presence is the point. That you do not look away from the worst version of what you are, because looking away is the beginning of doing it again. That was not a military asset. It was harder to defeat than one. Nathan Cole found me on the bench 10 minutes later with an umbrella he was not using for himself, just carrying on the side he was standing on, which was the side the wind was coming from, so it was doing nothing for him but blocking it slightly from reaching me. I noticed that. He did not say anything about it. The Selhari, he said, Alethromin 4's species. Yes. I know the absorption event, he said. Year 2214 of the conclave calendar, which translates to approximately 1713 by our reckoning. The Selhari home system had significant cultural infrastructure, literature, art, a complete oral history tradition. All of it was catalogued by conclave archivists and filed into what they call the Integration Archive. It has not been publicly accessible within the conclave for 180 years. He paused. It is not the only one. How many? Of the 846 absorbed species, said Nathan. My estimate, based on the files Krethoa has apparently offered to share, is that somewhere between 300 and 400 have active cultural suppression in their integration archive status, meaning their pre-absorption history is technically preserved but functionally inaccessible to their own descendants. I sat with that. 300 and more species. 300 systems with histories in glass cases that had no lights on them. Nathan, I said. Yes. Is that something your office can address? He was quiet for a long time, long enough that the rain picked up slightly and he tilted the umbrella 1 inch toward me without seeming to notice he was doing it. It is the largest archival recovery project in human history, he said, by a significant margin. Yes or no, Nathan? He looked at the lake. It is, he said, precisely what my office exists to do. I nodded. We sat in the rain for a little while longer without talking, which was the right choice. Some things, when they are large enough, need a moment of quiet before you start planning them. Nathan understood that instinctively. It was probably why I had asked for him specifically. Eventually, I stood up. My back hurt from the concrete bench. The rain was heavier now. Somewhere over Geneva, the afternoon was turning toward evening, and the streetlights were just starting to come on, orange and warm against the gray. The fleet is still up there, Nathan said. Yes, I said. Do you think they will maintain the suspension? I thought about it honestly. I think the War Council still has a faction that believes acting now is the cleaner option, I said. I think Krethoa has enough influence to hold the suspension for the 90 days. I think what happens after that depends on the first formal contact and who we send and what we choose to lead with. And what should we lead with? Not weapons, I said. Not the projection files. Not capability assessments or defensive treaties or trade agreements. I looked up at the darkening sky. Somewhere past those clouds, past the atmosphere, past the distance that used to feel infinite, 40,000 ships were waiting with green running lights and a decision that had not finished forming yet. We lead with the historians. We lead with the archives. We show up to the first conversation already carrying the histories of the species they absorbed and forgot. And we say here, these belong to someone. Nathan was quiet. That is either an act of diplomacy, he said slowly, or an act of something considerably bolder. Nathan, I said, with us, those have always been the same thing. I picked up my jacket from the bench and walked back toward the building. The lights inside were on and warm, and through the windows I could see people still moving, still talking, still working through the enormous shape of what came next. I stopped at the door and looked back at the sky one more time. The fleet was up there, reading, processing, carrying a hesitation that had started as strategy and was becoming something else, something that did not have a clean resolution, something that would require a different kind of answer than any the Conclave had reached for before. We had given them a lot to think about. 3 minutes of audio, 5 files, 1 paragraph, and the quiet, steady knowledge of what we had survived to send it. I went inside. There was work to do, and we were very good at work. We were good at it in the specific way that comes from 10,000 years of building things in the ruins of the last thing, of writing down what went wrong and reading it to the next generation, of standing in the places where terrible things happened and deciding that the standing means something. The Conclave had hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. Not our answer. Not yet. The answer was still being written in 90-day diplomatic cycles and archival recovery projects and conversations between species that had been waiting 300 years to be asked the right question. But the hesitation was the beginning of it. And we were very, very good at beginnings. We had been practicing since before anyone was watching.